It really hits you when you see the numbers. I mean, over 62,000 firefighter injuries in the U.S. just in 2023 alone.
Mm-hmm. It's staggering.
And nearly, 40% of those happen right at the fire scene? It really puts the risks they face into perspective, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And, while we often think about the flames, the heat, they're protective gears, just so fundamental. The materials, the design, critical stuff.
Which is exactly what we're diving into today. Some really interesting new research on advanced firefighter protective clothing.
Yeah, we've got this study looking at different fabric blends and also using these things called phase change materials, PCMs.
Right, PCMs. And seeing how they affect flammability, but also critically how they help firefighters manage their body temperature in those multi-layer suits.
So for you, our learner audience, think of this as your shortcut. We're pulling out the key insights, the surprising bits, without getting totally bogged down in the jargon.
Exactly, our mission here. To understand how material science, really cutting-edge stuff, is trying to solve that tough problem, making gear safer and more comfortable at the same time. Okay, so the big challenge. It seems pretty obvious, right?
It really is. There's this inherent conflict, You add more layers for better protection against the heat, the flames.
Which you absolutely need.
Which you need, definitely. But those layers, they can trap heat and moisture coming off the firefighter's body. They reduce that transfer away from the skin.
So you end up safer from the fire, maybe, but you're potentially cooking inside the suit. Heat stress is a huge deal.
A major concern. It's a real balancing act. And the study points out, the standard suit has those 3 layers, right?
Yeah, the outer shell, the moisture barrier, and the thermal barrier.
Exactly. Outer shell takes the brunt. Moisture barrier keeps water out, but ideally lets some vapor escape. And the thermal barrier is more insulation and helps sweat evaporate. Each has a job, but together. Yeah, they can trap heat.
Okay, so enter these phase change materials, PCMs. You said it sounds futuristic, and it kind of does. What exactly are they? How do they help with this heat issue?
Yeah, it's neat stuff. PCMs are basically materials that can absorb a lot of heat when they change phase, like melting from solid to liquid, and then release it when they solidify again. And they do this at specific temperatures. So you can kind of tune them. They create this dynamic thermal buffer.
So it's almost like having tiny built-in, heat sponges in the fabric.
That's a good way to think about it, yeah. Heat sponges or maybe tiny thermal batteries. In this study, the researchers used coconut oil.
Coconut oil? Really?
Yep, coconut oil. But it was microencapsulated. So imagine tiny, tiny bubbles of coconut oil coated in a shell.
Okay.
And these microcapsules were applied to the top surface of the fabric's inner layer, the one closest to the body. They used a polyurethane binder to sort of glue them in place.
Huh. Coconut oil. Why that specifically? Is it just the melting point?
Exactly. Its melting range is actually quite suitable for this, for absorbing heat around body temperature. We'll get into the specifics later. But yeah, microencapsulating it keeps it contained, and the binder makes sure it sticks to the fabric.
Got it. Okay, so coconut oil capsules embedded in the fabric to absorb heat. What kinds of fabrics were they actually testing this on?
Right, so they made 4 experimental fabric combinations. They labeled them S1, S2, S3, and S4.
Okay.
And they also had a control sample, SC, which was basically a standard off-the-shelf firefighter suit material to compare against.
Makes sense. Can you break down what was in those experimental ones, S1?
Sure. S1 used Nomex for the outer and inner layers. Nomex is pretty well known for fire resistance. It's an aramid fiber. In the middle, they had a PTFE moisture barrier that's polytetrafluoroethylene, kind of like Teflon.
Okay, Nomex, PTFE, Nomex. And the PCM was on that inner Nomex layer.
Correct. Then S2 was similar, but it used Protex fibers instead of Nomex for the outer and inner layers.
Yeah.
Still PTFE in the middle, PCM on the inner Protex.
Protex. Different type of fire-resistant fiber.
Yeah, another flame-resistant fiber. S3 used to blend. 70% Nomex and 30% carbon fiber for the outer and inner layers. PTFE barrier, PCM on inner blend layer.
Nomex carbon, interesting blend. And S4.
S4 was another blend. 70% Nomex, 30% Protex, outer and inner layers. PTFE barrier, BCM on the inner blend.
Okay, got it. 4 different takes on combining fire resistance with this PCM tech and the control SC, just a standard market sample.
Exactly. The paper didn't detail its exact composition, but it serves as the baseline what firefighters might currently be using.
Right. So a good comparison point. What tests did they run on all these? Must have been quite a few.
Oh, yeah. a whole battery of tests. They look at basic physical properties like thickness and weight, but the really interesting stuff was the thermophysiological comfort properties.
Like how comfortable they'd actually feel to wear.
Exactly. Heat, moisture management, that kind of thing. And then, of course, the flammability and heat resistance performance.
Let's start with comfort then. What did they find? Airflow.
Air permeability, yeah. That's how easily air passes through.
Yeah.
And here, sample S1, the all-Nomex one with PCM, really stood out. It showed a 37.3% increase in air permeability compared to the control sample.
Wow, that's quite a jump. Any idea why?
The researchers thought it was probably down to the Nomex fabric,
Yeah.
just being inherently thinner than whatever was in the control sample.
And better airflow means better cooling, less trapped moisture.
Definitely helps with ventilation, yeah. Helps the body's natural cooling mechanisms work better. So that's a big plus for comfort.
Okay. What about moisture, like handling sweat?
That was a bit more mixed, actually. They looked at things like how fast the fabric surface gets wet, how quickly water gets absorbed, and how far it spreads. And generally, the results weren't amazing.
Yeah.
On the inner surface, the one without the PCM, wetting was slow, absorption wasn't great, spreading was limited across all samples.
Not ideal if you're sweating heavily.
Not ideal, but there was a difference on the outer surface of the inner layer, the side, with the PCM treatment.
What happened there?
On that PCM-treated side, things look better. Faster wetting time, better absorption rate, the water spread out more, significantly better than the untreated side, and also better than the control sample surface.
So the PCM treatment itself seems to help with moisture handling, at least on the surface it's applied to.
Seems to have some positive effect there, yeah. Still maybe room for improvement overall, but a noticeable benefit from the PCM.
Interesting. And thermal conductivity. How easily did heat pass through?
They measured that too. Sample S2, the Protex one with PCM, actually had the highest thermal conductivity. It transferred heat a bit more readily than the others.
Okay, so S1 better for air. S2 conducts heat a bit more, lots of trade-offs. Now, the crucial part, fire and heat performance. How did they hold up?
Right. They did both horizontal and vertical flame tests. Good news first. All samples passed. No after flame, no afterglow once the flame source was removed.
Okay, that's baseline critical. Good. Any differences within that pass?
Yes. In the vertical test, which is often considered tougher, sample S1, the Nomex with PCM, again had the shortest char length.
Shortest char length, meaning less material was damaged by the flame.
Exactly. A shorter char length means better flame resistance. The material stops burning more effectively once the source is gone.
And why did the Nomex one do best there?
Nomex has this inherent property where it forms a stable char when it's exposed to intense heat. That char layer acts like a protective barrier, shielding the material underneath.
So it kind of sacrifices itself to protect the rest.
In a way, yes. And interestingly, the control sample, SC, actually performed relatively poorly here compared to S1, had a longer char length.
So the new Nomex PCM combo outperformed the standard material in that direct flame test. Good sign. What about other heat sources, like radiant heat?
Yeah, the heat you feel radiating off a big fire. They tested for steady-state radiant heat resistance. Here, sample S3 came out on top.
S3, that was the Nomex carbon blend with PCM, right?
That's the one. It resisted the radiant heat the longest, even doing better than the control sample.
Why do you think the blend worked best for radiant heat?
The researchers suggested it might be a combination of things. The specific way the fabric was constructed could play a role. Plus, you've got the inherent heat resistance of both Nomex and carbon fibers working together.
Makes sense. Okay, what about convective heat? Heat moving through air or gas?
For steady-state convective heat resistance, sample S1 the Nomex with PCM was the winner again.
Back to S1.
Yep. It took the longest time for the temperature to rise significantly on the backside of the fabric when exposed to convective heat flow. This really points back to the excellent inherent flame and heat resistance of those aramid fibers, like Nomex.
So S1 seems like a really strong all-rounder in terms of heat and flame resistance.
It definitely seems to be emerging as a top performer across several tests.
Okay, you also mentioned infrared thermography. How did they use that? What did it show about the PCM?
The thermal camera stuff. It's pretty cool. They basically put pieces of the PCM-treated fabric and untreated fabric on a hot plate, side by side.
And watch them heat up.
Exactly. Using the infrared camera, you could visually see the temperature difference. The fabric with the PCM lagged behind significantly.
Yeah.
It took much longer to reach the same temperature as the untreated fabric.
So the PCM was actively slowing down the temperature rise.
Precisely. After just 30 seconds, there was already a noticeable temperature difference. It visually demonstrates that thermoregulating effect the PCM absorbing heat energy during its phase change.
That's a great visual confirmation. It's like the PCM puts the brakes on heat transfer for a while.
That's a perfect way to put it. It absorbs that incoming heat energy, delaying the temperature rise on the side closer to the firefighter.
And the other analysis, differential scanning calorimetry, DSC.
Right.
What did that tell you about the coconut oil specifically?
Right. The DSC focused just on the PCM itself, the microencapsulated coconut oil. It measured how much energy it could absorb or release. That's the enthalpy. And it found the normalized enthalpy was 0.96 joules per gram, which, even though they only added about 1% PCM by weight to the fabric, indicates a pretty decent capacity for energy storage. It can soak up a good amount of heat for its weight.
And the temperature range? Did it match up well?
It did. The DSC showed the melting started around 18 degrees Celsius, peaked near 25 degrees C, and finished around 28 degrees C.
So right in that range where you'd want it to be active, absorbing heat before the firefighter gets too hot.
Exactly. That latent heat storage happening within that specific temperature window is what provides the thermal regulation benefit. The DSC basically confirmed the coconut oil PCM had the right properties, good energy storage, in the relevant temperature zone.
Okay, one last big test metric, thermal protective performance, TPP. Sounds important. What is it?
It is important. TPP measures how long it takes for enough heat energy to transfer through the fabric to cause a predicted second-degree burn. It uses a combination of both radiant and convective heat.
So, kind of simulating a flashover scenario. Intense, short burst of heat.
Exactly that kind of scenario. It's a really critical safety measure.
And the results? How did the samples compare here?
This was interesting. The control sample, SC, actually had the highest TPP value overall.
Oh, the standard material was best? Why?
Most likely because it was just thicker and heavier than the experimental samples. More mass generally means more time before heat gets through in this kind of test.
Ah, okay. So a bit of a trade-off there, perhaps. How did S1 do?
S1, the Nomex with PCM, did very well, though. Its TPP value was only about 11.9% lower than the control samples. So, quite comparable.
And compared to the other new samples?
Crucially, S1 outperformed the other experimental samples, S2, S3, and S4, in the TPP test.
Okay, so let me summarize that. The thicker, heavier control sample offered the absolute maximum protection in that specific flashover type test. But S1, the Nomex PCM, was pretty close behind and significantly better than the other new materials they developed.
You got it. So while the control won on pure TPP score, likely due to bulk, the S1 sample provided a better level of thermal protection compared to the Protex or the other Nomex blend options tested.
It really sounds like S1 is hitting a sweet spot then. Good flame resistance, best air permeability for comfort, decent moisture handling on the PCM side, good convective heat resistance, and very respectable TPP.
That's pretty much the conclusion the researchers reached. When you look at the whole picture, sample S1 Nomex PTFE Nomex with PCM seems to offer the most promising balance.
So the big takeaway from this deep dive?
I think it's that sample S1 really does look like a strong candidate for next-gen firefighter gear. It successfully blends that proven fire resistance of Nomex with better breathability and adds that extra layer of thermal regulation thanks to the PCM. It's tackling that safety versus comfort challenge head on.
It really does sound like a potential step change. You take a known strong material like Nomex, you enhance its comfort properties like air permeability, and then you add this smart material tech, the PCM. It feels like a really clever combination.
It is. And it highlights how combining inherent material strengths with these newer innovative technologies can lead to significant improvements. It's about making the gear work better for the firefighter on multiple levels.
Absolutely. Better safety, better comfort, potentially reducing heat stress. It all adds up to helping those folks who run towards danger stay safer.
For sure. This kind of material science advancement is incredibly important work.
It really is. This has been fascinating, thinking about these advances, these smart materials like PCMs being integrated into fabrics. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? If we can do this for firefighter gear, what other really high-risk jobs out there could benefit from this kind of revolution in their personal protective equipment? Where else could this tech make a huge difference?
That's a great thought to end on. The possibilities are definitely worth exploring.